Hey beautiful people, what is up? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to today's video. Today I'm finally gonna give you guys my first impression / review of the Hourglass Lotus palette. Now this is Hourglass's holiday release and I only picked up one because the other two don't work for me. And I was not about to waste my coins. Because as you know, Hourglass every year releases a holiday palette which consists of 6 different finishes of their special Hourglass for powders. I'm calling it special powders because I do think Hourglass is a very unique formulation. And each year they've given us, or for the last couple of years actually, they've given us light, medium, deep palettes. I have typically picked up the medium and the deep, but I only picked up the deep this year because these palettes also retail for $90, which is extremely expensive. But I'll get into whether or not I think that the price is worth it at the end of today's video. So I'm going to do my review a little bit differently today. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of product details, but I actually am going to talk about every single shade in this one-on-one and then kind of switch back and forth to me demoing the product. So let me know how you guys feel about this sort of style. It's a little bit different, but I thought I'd try something different. Okay, so go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Let's just dive right in. So like I said, this is the Hourglass 2024 holiday release. This is a part of a collection of 3. So you have the Lotus palette, the Evil Eye, and then the Dragon palette. Now, in terms of picking up the palettes, you can either buy it in the way it comes, where the Lotus palette is the deepest option, or you can actually customize by getting the powders inside in whatever cover you want. Totally up to you. The price doesn't change at all, and this is only available on the Hourglass website if you want to do the customization. As of right now, I know that this currently is only being sold at Hourglass, but as I understand it and as I believe, because they did do this in previous years, it will end up at other retailers like Sephora. So if you want to wait and hold on to see who else it comes to, totally fine to do so. I also know that if you purchase on the Hourglass website, there are some creators that have some 10% discount codes floating around that you can potentially use. And Hourglass also does, I believe, have a welcome code for 15% off. So that's also a good opportunity for you to save an extra $15 if you don't find an influencer code. So something to be mindful of. So like I said, 3 palettes, 3 different covers. There is also a brush. There are also single brushes that are available, or a brush set that you can get, as well as some gift bags and some gift boxes if you want to pick it up. But I didn't buy any of that because I don't need any of that. I might get a brush later on if it's on sale at some point. Anyways, that being said, you do get all of the product details at the back, and most importantly, you get a list of what the different powders are, because you have multiple finishes in this palette. So in this palette, there are 2 strobe lights, which is Hourglass's version of a highlighter. There are 2 blushes, 1 finishing powder, and 1 bronzer. Now, the most exciting news about this palette for this year is the fact that in this year's release, every single palette has 5 brand new shades and 1 repeat shade. In previous years, we've seen Hourglass repeat 1 to even like 3, 4 shades. So the fact that these are all majority new shades is really exciting, because I think that it makes it a much better value for people like myself who have multiple of these palettes and tend to collect them. So if you were worried that you were going to get a ton of repeats, you're not going to get exact repeat shades, but I will be very frank, the colors are like pinks and purples and mauves. So in the grand scheme of things, they're not like vastly different, but they are technically new shades. So just to show you guys up close the palette and just point out the different shades that we have the finishing powder, we have the blush, we have the strobe light / highlighter, another highlighter, another blush, and then the bronzer. Okay, so let me talk to you guys about each of the shades, and then, like I said, I'm going to switch back and forth into the demo of how I used it. So the first thing that I actually did in creating this face was I actually used this palette as my eyeshadow for today, because I wanted to see how versatile this palette can be. Because it retails for $90, I wanted to see if I could truly get my money's worth by being able to use the powders as both sort of eyeshadow and face products. They are technically intended to be face products, but you know, makeup is makeup. You can do whatever you want with it. So I actually went in with the 2 strobe lighters. So the first one is a really beautiful kind of coppery orangey shade, and I took that and I applied that to the outer half of my eye. And all I did was lay down some concealer and set that as I typically do. And I found that this actually showed up really nicely on the skin. So if you were going for something that's a little bit lighter and a little bit more ethereal, you could just take one swish and swipe it across the entire lid. But what I did do is I kind of went back and forth multiple times to pack that copper shade onto the lid because I wanted a little bit of opacity. I wanted it to really pop. Then once I was done applying that sort of orangey copper shade to the outer half of the eye, I went in with the second strobe lighter, which is the gold highlight, and I actually put that into the inner part of the eye. Now this one I think really shines. I think this one really pops. I don't know if it's because this one is a little bit starker and brighter on my skin tone, that I actually, when I applied that to the lid, I was like, this is beautiful. Again, another stunning one and done shade if you just wanted to get a little bit of shine. So I applied that to the first half of the lid, and then I kind of blended it into the second shade. And I kind of went back and forth with those two strobe lights to get the kind of gradient that I wanted and to get the opacity that I wanted on my lids. Once I was done applying the strobe lights to the lid and kind of basically creating the eyeshadow, I actually went in then with the bronzer in the palette. The bronzer, Bronze Heat, this is another brand new shade. I should say the only repeat shade in this palette is the finishing powder. Everything else is new. So the bronzer I actually took and I applied it to the crease just so that I can blend out the edges and have a little bit of matteness going on in there. So I took the bronzer, applied it to the crease, running it on top of the eyes. I didn't go all the way to the front of the lid. And then I put a little bit in the corner just to give it some depth. But for the most part, you can see that this look does not have a ton of depth in the outer corner because that's exactly what I was going for. I just really wanted to concentrate that bronzer to the top of the eye. And I felt like it blended out really, really well. It does have a little bit more redness to it and it does show up really nicely. But this is also another product that I can see as a simple one and done look if I wanted something that was a little bit more matte on the eyes and I didn't want to use the strobe lights as highlighters. So all in all, I thought that this created a really beautiful eye look. Then I just went in with some black eyeliner because I'm out of my brown. I would typically go in with a brown eyeliner so that's a little bit less harsh, especially because there's no like deep outer V. But I ran out of my brown liner, so I went in with a little bit of black liner, and I thought that in the end, the look came out beautifully. I don't know if you saw this, you would not know that this wasn't eyeshadow that I used to create the look. Okay, next, once I was done doing the eyes, I primed my face. I used my Milk Mattifying Primer for this look because I want to have like a bit of a matte face. And then for my foundation, I actually went in with the Ease Drops from Fenty. I'm so close to finishing that out. So my goal really is to empty that out completely. So that's what I went in for my sort of base concealer. After I set everything in terms of the concealer and just sort of setting powder, then I dove back into the palette. So let me talk about the rest of the powders in this palette. So what I always do once I'm doing the rest of my face is I start with the bronzer. So I actually started with the bronzer in sort of the top part of my face just to see, like, does this have a lot of opacity? Is it going to show up? And honestly, it took a lot of building to get here. First and foremost, I had to go in with a very, very small brush. I'm actually using one of the brushes from the Ariel X Morphe palette. And that's just because the pan sizes here is so small that if you are like me and you typically prefer a big fluffy brush, you're going to get all of this cross-contamination. So you have to go in with a really precise brush. And that's part of the reason why I actually would like to get the Hourglass brushes, because I think that they're designed to fit into these pans specifically. So I went in with the bronzer and sort of like I started in my forehead, then I went into like the cheekbone side of it. It did take a little bit of building, but eventually it does show up on my skin tone. You just have to build it to get there. I am worried that this is not going to show up on much darker skin tones than mine, because while I think it shows up on me, it does give a very nice natural flush, and I don't know if it's going to show up on other skin tones. So if you do have a deeper complexion than mine, I don't know, y'all. I'm a little skeptical on that one. Once I was done applying the bronzer to my entire face, then I transitioned to blush. So I knew this wasn't going to work, but I had to try it anyway. So I started off with this light blush here. Now this blush is actually called Desert Flush. And it is a desert. This shit is ashy. Let's start there. Ash, dust. So I put it on my face. It didn't show up at all. And I didn't want to keep building so that I would end up with something that was super dusty. I just wanted to know what was the reason? What was the point? Who asked for that? And who said, yes, let's just put dust into the deep palette. Anyways, so that blush didn't do anything. So then I transitioned and I actually went over that with the second blush in the palette. This is Red Zero. So that one actually is very, very pigmented. And I actually went a little bit overboard. I had to go back in with my powder brush to tone things down a bit. So if you are my complexion, just go in with a light hand, which is, you know, something I never expected I would say about Hourglass. Now, once I was done applying the blush, I actually feel like because this is so pigmented and this is dust, if you wanted to, you could probably mix the two blushes together to get a really nice shade if you are my complexion, or you just don't want something that's this red, because it does show up pretty red on the face. It is a matte blush, so there's no real shimmer or shine or anything to it other than that sort of Hourglass sheen, which I think comes with all of their powders. So it's not like a shimmery blush like what they had in their Tiger palette with that orange blush from last year. So something, or the year before actually, so something to be mindful of. Not a super shiny blush, but I like it. I actually don't think I like their swirly blushes. I don't know, something about it just doesn't seem to work or like make sense to me. So really like the blush application on this. And then finally, the last, well, not finally. And then after I applied the blush, I went in with highlight. So I actually went back to the strobe lighters / highlighters, and I started with the copper shade. I applied that to one side of the face. Quite frankly, it is really, really dark for my complexion. So this would actually be a beautiful blush topper for me rather than a highlight. I think this combined with the red blush would be stupid beautiful if you want something that's a little bit more shimmery, because as a highlighter, it's just too deep for me. The gold strobe light, however, stunning. I think that showed up really beautifully on the skin. It's actually very, very stark, so if you don't want something super blinding, go in lightly, but that immediately showed up on my skin tone, and it was like very clear it was highlighter. So I actually ended up taking that gold and putting it back on the other side that I had the copper one, because it really wasn't doing much for my complexion. And then finally, to sort of pull everything together, I took the finishing powder and I just dusted that all over my face to bring everything together. I did spray my face with setting spray, the one size setting spray, before doing that though. I'm not sure if that's the right order to do things, but that's what I did. So I set my face with the one size setting spray, and then I went in with the finishing powder just to pull everything together. So that's how I created this face. I want to pull you guys in closer so that you can see sort of like the final product. And then I want to dive into some comparisons, because like I said, Hourglass does this every year. This is their sort of recurring release. So I want to show you guys how this palette compares to previous years and give you a little bit of my thoughts, so that if you were hesitant to pick this up because you've either never bought this palette before, or you have a bunch of them, hopefully this can help you decide if it's worth spending your $90 on. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed seeing me apply all of the shades and demo the Lotus palette on my face. So to wrap up the video, I want to end with a little bit of comparison. So I want to show you guys how the Lotus palette compares to the other Hourglass holiday palettes that I have in my collection. Now, I'm not going to swatch it because quite frankly, the Hourglass palettes and the Hourglass powders don't swatch very well. So I don't think that they're super helpful. You really do see the magic when you apply it on your face. But I do want to hold them up next to each other so you guys can see how similar or how different the shades are. I also do have a little bit of artificial light, so I'm going to turn that off so you guys just get the natural light that's coming in from my window. Okay, I don't know if it looked like it made a difference, but you should see it when I'm holding up the palettes. And what I actually want to do is work my way backwards. I'm going to start with the most recent collection, so Hourglass Holiday 2023, and then work my way down so you guys can see that, because that's like what I think most people have. So again, here we have the Lotus palette from this year, and this is the Lotus palette in comparison to the Owl palette, which was the second darkest palette from last year. Was it the Owl? Was it the Owl? I think it might have been, but this is the second deepest one, so you guys can see these two next to each other. Definitely you see the Lotus palette is deeper, but let's compare the Lotus palette to the Snake palette from last year. The Snake palette was last year's deepest palette. And the bronzers are two completely different bronzers. You'll remember that the bronzer this year is a brand new bronzer. So here they are again next to each other. Even the finishing powders in these are different. The Snake palette's finishing powder is a little bit lighter than this one. So this one has a deeper finishing powder. Next, let's go to Holiday 2022. So you guys will remember that's when we had the Elephant and the Tiger palette. Let me show you guys both of these. The top one is the Tiger palette. You have the beautiful orange think it was a blush, and then the bottom is the Elephant palette. The Elephant palette was the medium Hourglass palette from last year. So here we have the Lotus compared to the Elephant. I think you can still see Lotus is darker, but you get a lot of those sort of like peachy shades. You know, when it comes to the blush shades, they don't exactly venture too far apart. You're always going to get something that's kind of like pinky, deep purple, mauve, or something that's more peachy or more orange. And then here is Lotus compared to the Tiger palette. Now the Tiger palette from last year did not have a bronzer. I believe they only had a finishing powder. Yeah, so this one did not have a bronzer. It was only blush, highlights, or strobing powders. This one actually has 3 highlights, which I think was a little bit excessive. We didn't need all of that. And a finishing powder. I feel like the finishing powder in this shade is actually a lot darker than the one in here. And the finishing powder in here feels like it could be a bronzer. Yeah, why are they calling it a finishing powder though? I've definitely used the finishing powder in the Tiger palette as a bronzer because this is actually pretty dark and pretty rich, and quite frankly, the finishing powder in the Tiger palette to me looks darker than the bronzer in the Lotus palette. Yeah, so this is the bronzer in the Lotus palette. This is the finishing powder in the Tiger palette. You know what? I am going to swatch these two on my, like, fingers so you guys can see if I'm correct or if I'm crazy. So, Tiger palette, Lotus palette. So, this is Tiger, this is Lotus. Actually, Lotus definitely looks deeper and a little bit more red. Tiger looks a lot more neutral. Okay, I see the difference. So I think what that means is that Lotus bronzer might actually be the deepest bronzer that the brand has ever made. Don't quote me on that, but let me know if I'm right, if you know. Okay, I have 3 more of those large holiday palettes. I don't actually know what the names of these are, but I just want to hold them up so you guys can see them. Some of these I'm actually decluttering. So here we have it up against this one. As you can see, this one is extremely, extremely light. These were several years ago at this point. Then there's this one. Also really, really light. Definitely getting decluttered from my collection. And lastly, this one. This was actually the year that instead of giving us 6 shades, they made one of the shades just a giant finishing powder. And the last thing that I actually want to do is to hold it up against one of the trios. They actually created this ambient lighting palette volume 3 because the 2 before this were for like light and medium complexions, and you know, people complained, as they should, because there was not a ambient lighting palette for darker skin tones. So this one came about. So this one actually has 2, I think they call them finishing powders, but honestly I think it's like a bronzer. So we have like a strobe lighter, which is honestly a little bit deep on me, but either way, we have highlight, bronzer, finishing powder, perfect for darker complexions. Funny enough, the bronzer in this palette is actually the same bronzer that's in the Tiger palette that I just swatched for you guys. So technically the bronzer in this Lotus palette is actually deeper than the bronzer in this ambient lighting palette. So here we have this up against this one, just so you guys can see what this one looks like. Okay, so now that you guys have seen the palettes and seen the comparisons, just to really wrap things up, when it comes to the Hourglass palettes, I honestly do think that these are more collector type products. And I think people like myself and those who are kind of borderline collectors get excited by this because this is like the big release of the brand every year. It's kind of like Mama Pat coming out with her mothership. Like, you know it's going to be pink, but you're going to buy it anyway. So I think a lot of times it can be really easy to get caught up in collecting this. But to be quite frank, you don't need to. If you have one or two of these palettes, you don't need to collect them all. Because like I said, the blushes tend to all be pink, mauve, peach, maybe orange. So they don't change quite much. And usually there are repeat shades. This is actually probably the first time that the brand has given us this much new shades in a palette. If you don't have any of the Hourglass palettes, though, I will say that it is a good investment because buying one of these powders is extremely expensive. So this is pretty good value considering that you're getting 6 different shades. And I think that this year they've done a better job at sort of giving us diversity, because I think last year with the 3 highlighters, we didn't need any of that. But now that you're getting blush, a really good ratio of blush, highlight, and finishing powders, I think, and even bronzer. So blush, bronzer, highlight, finishing powders. I think that's a really, really good balance that they've put at least into the Lotus palette this year. So if you don't have any of them, I think that it's probably worth picking it up. That being said, I know that this is going to end up at like Sephora and some other retailers. So you don't have to buy it on the Hourglass website. You can actually wait for like the Sephora VIP sale or maybe Nordstrom. I don't know, one of those other retailers. You know they always have that 15-20% off sale. And I've even seen Hourglass... Excuse me. I've even seen Hourglass go on sale as well, so you can probably get a discount there as well. So you definitely don't have to buy it at the $90 because it's going to go on sale and you're going to be able to pick it up. It is limited edition though, so once it sells out, and they don't bring this back. So it really is a collector's item if you want to look at it like that. But like I said, this is not necessary if you have a huge collection. I will say that I do think Hourglass is a beautiful powder formula. Like, it's extremely light, super diffused on the skin, and creates, in my opinion, a more natural look. So if you're not looking for very heavy glam, I think you will really, really enjoy this. And again, from a versatility perspective, you guys saw me apply this both as eyeshadow and as my face products. So if you want, you can be really creative in it. Like, I just used the strobing powders, but I could have gone in with like the blush for an all matte eye look as well. So there's a lot of ways in which you can use the palette in a way that makes sense. If you are deeper than me, let me just point out the flaws again. So the bronzer, it's okay, but honestly, I feel like the bronzer and the ambient lighting palette that I showed you guys, I think this shows up better on my skin than this one, which is surprising because this one swatches darker. I'm not sure why, but I do like the way that this one shows up better on my skin tone. And I do think that when it comes to darker skin tones, like Hourglass has cracked the deep/medium deep category, but they haven't yet entered into the dark realm. I'll be very honest, like, I know we've given them praise for how far they've come, but honestly, there's still a whole category that they're missing. So they have not created products for darker skin tones. For dark, deep, dark, rich skin tones. Deep, medium, deep, yes. But dark, rich, no, they haven't got there yet. So that's something to be mindful of. This shade that's supposed to be a blush also. Who is supposed to blush? I mean, I'm medium deep and it doesn't even blush me. So this is a bit of a waste for me. Maybe I can use it as a blush topper or to blend out the deeper rich shade. Or I can use it as a... What can I use this as? Eyeshadow? Yeah, I could do a one and an eyeshadow look with it. So this is the one shade I will say in the palette that actually makes no sense at all whatsoever for even deep skin tones. So that's just something to be mindful of. Am I glad I picked this up? Yeah, I mean, I do enjoy collecting these palettes. I don't think I'm going to get the other one, the medium one, because I've typically bought the medium and the deep versions, but I'm fine with just this one. I'm good. Sis is content. So we're just going to stop right there. Anyways, I want to thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Let me know if you plan on picking this up. Let me know if you have picked this up, if you have any thoughts on the palettes. Leave all that in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you all much more than you know, and I'll catch you in my next one. Bye, guys.